Hey Grandmasters, Michael Mori. I'm going to send out a short video today of a game that I found that I think will help us play positions that are not only sharp but difficult to play because the pawns are not really pointing us in the right direction. Let me explain what I mean by that. So quickly, let's just look at an advanced French position, which would be here, right? If you're playing the black side of a French, the pawns are almost screaming at us to play the move c5 to immediately break white's chain, and then white almost always responds with c3. And this early in the game, it should be very clear that both sides are basing their play on the pawn structure, especially since the pawns are locked. We also know that it's probably going to be a while before the rooks play because of the closed nature of the position. Now, compare that for a moment to this position, which is going to be the position that will come up in the game that we're going to study today. This is completely different because here in this position, first of all, there have been trades, and the pawn structure is very different for both sides. Examine this for a moment. You'll see that white's pawn structure is pristine. Yeah, it's not touched. It's still nice and neat. Nothing has been moved yet. No weaknesses. Black structure on the queen side does not look good. You've got holes everywhere. But in return for those broken pawns, black has the two bishops, which right now don't really say much. I mean, the game is still very early in the going here, but in the future, because the board is semi-open, the bishops can flourish, right? I don't know about all of you, but I have a lot of trouble playing positions like this sometimes because the pawns are not saying anything. They're not in contact here. So there's so many opportunities to put pieces on different squares, to set up batteries, to fight for files, that it's not always clear what the best options are. So, how to play sharp positions. Couple of things. One, make sure everything is protected. Now, that goes without saying. Like, if you have a tactic, if you see a way to win a pawn or something, a skew or a double attack, then naturally you do that first. But what you'll see masters very often do is that when there aren't clear tactics, they just protect things. Always make sure your king has an escape square, or consider king safety in a position like this. Ask yourself, do I have a piece in the game that it's not working? It's very, very important that the pieces are active. Now, in this position, clearly you're not going to play the move king e7, are you? No. But if you did, for let's say it's a mouse slip, even on an online game, you could play king e7, and you might actually be able to survive this for a while. Again, why? Because of the closed nature of the position. All right, back to this. First, let me show you how we got here. This comes from a four knights defense where white allows the center fork trick. So here it comes. No need to discuss this. Everybody watching this video knows what's going on there. There's the fork, and it's one of the variations where white takes up the challenge of doubling black's pawns. Now, why is the center fork trick played? We've discussed this. Black gets to keep a pawn in the middle of the board. They have more space. But after the move bishop to d6, which is almost always played to protect the e-pawn, there is the option of bishop takes knight. A lot of masters kind of avoid that because they're giving up the bishop pair kind of early. This is move 8. And again, black doesn't really have anything here. There's no forced win for either side. But it just feels right to have bishops in positions that are distant. Again, look at the two armies. They're separated by so much space. Bishops can sit back especially this bishop here on c8. It's sitting back, yet controlling 7 squares. The maximum number of squares a knight can ever control is 8, and that's when it's off the side of the board. So here's a bishop that has not moved yet it controls 7 squares, right? I hope that makes sense. So yeah, I have these broken pawns here, but I have a half-open B file. There's a half-open D file. So it kind of feels right to have the bishops. Queen e2. Pressure on the pawn. Castling. Obviously, you cannot take this pawn. If you do, the bishop takes. Queen cannot take back because of the pin. So that kind of tactic is easy at our level. But some of the others are a little more difficult to find. Like, for example, in the game, white plays the move d3. And if you put this on a computer, the computer is going to tell you pretty quickly that if d4 comes, that black is going to steal an advantage here from white. Why is that? Well, on the surface, there doesn't look like there's anything wrong because you have the square covered, right? You just play d4. All right, I took your pawn. When you take back, the problem is your king is still in the center. How did you get into this mess? You played a move that created pawn contact with your king in the center. And when I say pawn contact, you did it in the center. Here, let's back it up. Here's the position. If you play d4, you're opening up all the files. So if I take it, notice that rook e8, by the way, is not quite the same. It's still very good for black, this position, but I can at least block with the bishop. Still, you're asking for trouble playing the move d4. Take it, take it. Okay, pause the video. See if you can come up with something here. Yeah, one way to play is to just give the king a check. And giving the king a check exposes the queen to the knight, and if they play pawn to c3, you can just take the knight because of the pin. Forcing pawn takes bishop, you grab a pawn with check, and a very natural way to play might be to even sacrifice a second pawn. And when you take it, attacking the rook, white will castle. Now, some players in a position like this think they can get away with the sacrifice. I think it's 2 pawns here. Yeah, it is. Because the bishops are of opposite color. And their idea might be, okay, let's trade all the heavy pieces. Black has these doubled pawns. Maybe I can blockade them with opposite colored bishops and make a draw. That thinking is really not correct here. Because if you look at this board, yeah, the bishops are of opposite color, but there are no center pawns, meaning the board is wide open, and all remaining 8 power pieces are all long-range pieces, meaning tactics can come up anywhere on the board. I have long-range pieces, I can reach the entire board. That's the theory. So just because you have bishops of opposite color does not guarantee you an easy life in the middle game. As a matter of fact, the theory says if there's still enough firepower on the board, then it favors the player that's attacking. You know, if I can create some problems for you on g2, that's a light square. Your bishop's going to be helpless. Okay, so this position, probably don't want to go down that road. All right, that's why d3 was played. Here was the position I was talking about earlier. What to do. Improve a piece and don't play reflexive moves. The more I look at positions like this, the more I learn that masters are not in a rush to develop the bishop just because it can. In the game, black played the move rook e8 instead of the very natural bishop to g4, right? Just says, nope, I'll just move the rook, give the pawn some protection. I might push that pawn with your queen in the middle and carry on. And now it's up to white to decide whether or not they want to attack, which they did here. They came after this loose c-pawn by playing the move queen to e4. Queen e4 has kind of a sneaky idea behind it. It's not just attacking the c-pawn, but she's got her eye on h7. And you all see who she's planning to coordinate with? That's right, the knight on f3. So now black commits the bishop and plays bishop to b7, protecting the pawn, allowing knight g5, which pretty much forces g6. You force g6, you open up all the dark squares around the king. Problem is, the knight is in the way of the bishop. Queen h4. And now h5, giving white the opportunity to play a move that completely opens the game. And what move would that be? It would be pawn to g4, correct? If you choose to play it, you're pushing a pawn on the king side. Your king is in the center, and the question is, are you asking for trouble? All right. Yeah, you're under a little bit of heat here. Look at every check and capture. In this position, one way to try to play your way out of this is to play the move bishop to b4. Check. What is the most natural thing for white to do? And that would be to shoo the bishop. If you shoo the bishop, you're going to get punished by queen takes d3 check, which looks like you're completely ignoring, first of all, you're ignoring the bishop and you're ignoring the attack on the king side. The problem is time. The board is wide open. Black has long-range pieces. Pause the video. What happens after pawn takes bishop? Okay, what'd you come up with? Should we put the rook on f8 to protect f7? No. Bishop a6. Long-range piece in a sharp open position. I think you're getting checkmated. Isn't that amazing? Look at all the mobility the white pieces have. They can all pretty much move, and not a single piece can stop queen to e2. I mean, I guess this little pawn can, but not for long, right? Okay, that's why after h5, white decides to centralize, creating another attack on f7, but it's now kind of artificial. Simply queen to d7 protecting the pawn. All good. Castle. And how do we continue to play for white? A lot of players would play the move a5. The reason would be because they see they can attack the queen with the bishop. But that might not be the right play, because if you look past the attack on the queen, you're going to realize your bishop's going to be hitting a brick wall. So what he did is he just centralized the queen, protecting his king side. And this is an important moment. I'm referring back to a point I made in the introduction. Another thing that masters do in these sharp positions, every single piece that black has on the board is protected by something, except what? This bishop down here. I can guarantee you that, and black is a 2400, that when black played queen to f5, they are very much aware of the fact that that bishop is loose. So there really isn't any way to take advantage of it. But that's your responsibility, right? Improve the queen, keep things protected. If you happen to have a loose piece, keep an eye on it. Knight e4. Black here decides to go in for a shift, asking to go in for something of an ending now. which would have been pretty equal had it happened. If you take the queen, how do you take back? Yeah, you have to take with the rook, otherwise knight f6 is troubling. And what if the knight takes the bishop? Well, now you have the pleasant choice of taking back. Here, I would just take back with the pawn, correcting the pawn structure. This position would be much more drawish than the one I showed you before. And let me see if I could dig that position up. Yes, I think I can. Right here. Remember this one? After castling? And I was telling you some players try to get away with the bishops of opposite color ideas. Well, again, look at the long-range pieces that are left and look at the pawn structure. There are open highways everywhere. Totally different than if you traded everything off here. Look at the difference. Bishops of opposite color, but because the pawns are more uniform and the files are more closed, the rooks are not going to play. Meaning this game is probably going to peter out to a draw if both players play correctly. But after queen e6, white decides, no, I don't really want to trade. I'll develop my last minor piece. And now black makes a little bit of a shift. Gave you a chance to take my bishop once. I'm going to get rid of the queen, keep the dark squared bishop, allow you to take the file, but I'm going to play f5. Yes, I'm weakening my king, but I'm going to ask you what you're declaring with your knight. And now the game gets very, very tactical. You cannot play here. You guys see why? Yeah, f4, and you're going to lose a pizza. So the knight comes to c5, attacking the bishop. And now black tries to win the game. Just tries to win it by playing the move f4. And it goes from being like, if I back this move up for a second, you see how uniform these pawns are? After the move f4, knight takes bishop, pawn takes. You see how the structure is completely changed and opened? Black's doing this for a reason. I put this on a computer, by the way, and the computer at this point kind of said it was still very equal. But humans playing this position have to be very, very careful. Now, why? Whenever you go for a tactic like this in a sharp position, another tip to remember is when you're playing bishop against knight, be very careful making a trade with a knight that puts the knight on b7. Here you can get away with it, but the danger is if something breaks out on the opposite side of the board. If we think mathematically and turn the chessboard into quadrants, where the knight is the complete opposite of where the white king is. The white king is on the top left, the knight is now on the bottom right. Those are opposites. So black, having the long-range minor piece, tries to stir things up on the king side. And he succeeds. He shouldn't have, but he succeeded here. White comes in, playing very, very aggressively. This game ends in like 4 moves. It's amazing from this position how that happens. The rook attacks the knight, rook takes c7, and bishop to g5. There's the shift that I was talking about. The bishop trying to play on the opposite side. Pawn to b3. Now it seems very natural to just attack that rook, but after the blockade, it's probably not going to be that much, there won't be that much going on, but black plays rook to b8. Kind of setting a trap, because you can see the pressure on f2, and white fell right into it. Stop your video. How do you protect the f2 square? I mean, if it's my turn again, I think I can just take the pawn and you're in major trouble, because if you move your king, it's going to move the e-pawn, and that thing's going to be really tough to stop. So in this position, white loses in one move. Which pawn should white have moved? Well, if you guessed the G pawn, you were correct. Pawn takes, King G2. You don't have to walk into any pins, and you can actually survive this. But in the game, pawn F3 was played, and after E2, white resigned. That's it. Game over. You can pause the video to figure out why, but this level of play, I don't think it's going to take you too long. What did we learn? Keep the pieces protected. Bishops of opposite color, when it works, when it doesn't work. Bishop against knight, be careful. Look where this knight ended up staying, right? Be careful. All right, Grandmasters.